Hello, everyone, and welcome to our spooky celebration. It's that time of year, so I am getting together with some of my favorite spooky author friends, and we are going to celebrate all things spooky middle grade. So before we dive in, let's find out who's here. I'll get started. I'm Kim Ventella. I am the author of 4 different books for middle graders, and several of those are out now. So my very first spooky skeleton tree, also, it's over here with my baby hand, so I'll give it y'all. Bone Hollow, my second novel, which is a standalone. So both of these deal with grief from different perspectives. This book deals with what happens when someone you love is ill and kind of what leads up to that. And you have a figure that I like to call kind of a death doula, like this sort of Grim Reaper figure that gently guides this family toward this horrible loss. And then Bone Hollow from the perspective of death. And 2 novels that are out this fall. Hello, Future Me, The Secret Life of Sam, and this very cool tribute to Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark anthology short story, and this one called Don't Turn Out the Lights. One fun fact about me, I used to work in a haunted house, and my character was an evil clown. So I'll just let you picture me as an evil clown, like scaring all the children, my dream job. Janet Fox, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm the author of 8 books for young readers, and this is my most recent, The Artifact Hunters. It's a sequel to The Charmed Children of Rookskill Castle, which came out about 4 years ago, and I didn't put it next to me, so I don't have it to show you. But both of these books are set in a Scottish castle during World War II, and they feature kids trying to overcome evil on every front in every form, and castles are always fun. This one features time travel, which was fun and a little hard for me to play with, but I loved it, and a Jewish boy who's escaping from Prague during World War II, so it has that extra layer of history. And I guess my fun fact is, and it has nothing to do with spookiness unless it's the dark, because it's really, really dark. But I have a degree in marine geology, and I've dove to the sea floor 2 miles down in a submersible where it is really, really dark.
That's very spooky, because so much of that is unexplored. So we don't know what lives down there. Like, that is truly spooky.
Yes.
I love it. I love it. I'm still waiting to see your middle grade novel about deep sea exploration. So
yeah, you never know.
And we're also joined by Adriana Cuevas. Introduce yourself.
All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Adriana. I am the author of The Total Eclipse of Nestor Lopez. It's about a Cuban-American boy who is part of a military family, so he's used to moving around a ton. But his one goal is to keep the fact that he can talk to animals a secret. But then a Tule Vieja, which is a witch that can turn into animals, starts terrorizing the town. So Nestor has to decide whether or not he's going to risk revealing his secret to help out. But that was my debut. And then I will have another book, a second book, publishing fall 2021, and it's kind of because it's a historical fiction. It's not contemporary fantasy, but it's called Cuba in My Pocket, and it's a fictional retelling of my dad's emigration to the US from Cuba in the 1960s. So I was tempted to make that a spooky story. I asked my dad if he would be cool with talking to the ghost of Fidel Castro, but he was like, no, let's not do that. So I had to resist my urges for that.
That's so funny. What is one fun, weird fact about you that people don't know?
I'm obsessed with languages. I have a degree in linguistics, and so I'm always trying to learn new languages. I sent my son a text yesterday, and it started off in Spanish, and it continued in English, and it ended in Korean. So he's really mad at me at this point because he doesn't understand what I'm trying to tell him. But yeah, if I could learn every language, I would. I absolutely love them.
I love it. Yeah, I'm kind of like you. Like I love the idea of learning languages. And then I realized that I'm actually kind of terrible at it. Like I'm really good at reading languages in a book, but when it comes to like speaking on the cuff, I get so nervous that my anxiety kind of like overcomes all my knowledge. It's like,
Yeah.
But I do talk to my dog a lot. So if that counts as talking to animals.
There you go. That's another language. There you go.
Have a lot in common. And finally, Josh Roberts, tell us about yourself.
Hi, so I am a debut author, and like Adriana, my book is about witches. It's about 6 of them, actually. It's called The Witches of Willow Cove. And it is set in a town very much like the one that I grew up in, here on the north of Boston on the coast, just next to Salem. And it involves the Salem witches and a lot of historical mysteries. And it's a dual perspective story. So it's told from the point of view of a 13-year-old girl named Abby and her best friend Robbie, and it's sort of in alternating chapters. They're solving mysteries and having adventures and dealing with lots of spooky things like ghosts and witchcraft and giant snakes slithering around the middle school gym and that sort of thing. It is the first in a series, and I am writing as fast as I can to get the second one done. The second one is going to be called The Curse of Willow Cove. And I'm not yet ready to give a release date, but I am working very, very, very fast on it. And a fun fact about me is that I grew up and lived in a spooky Victorian funeral home until I was 18.
As one does. If you're going to be a character in like a spooky middle grade novel, you better grow up in some weird haunted mansion, right? I mean, basically. Well, very cool. Well, welcome everyone. And so we are here because it is the spooky season. I mean, talk about like R.L. Stine's birthday is coming up. So we're very excited for that. Halloween, where I'm at in Oklahoma, we went from 90s to today, like 50s. It's like cold, rainy, gorgeous, beautiful, dreary weather. My favorite. So we're going to kind of talk about all things spooky middle grade. We're going to get to answering the top 10 questions that we get from students. But first of all, I just want to know like what spooky stories or like shows inspired you when you were a kid? Which ones did you really connect with? So let's start with Adriana.
So I was, and I don't know why, but I was obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe growing up. I actually have, this is my favorite. It's an anthology of his, but it's from the 1980s. And so all of the illustrations, like everybody has feathered hair. And I mean, it is peak 1980s art, but it's still the Edgar Allan Poe content that I love. But for some reason, when I was a kid, I was obsessed with this exact book. I would, even when the stories were maybe like a little bit more than I could comprehend, I was obsessed with the illustrations and just how gory they were. And I don't know. I had a pretty normal childhood. I don't know why I was so bloodthirsty, but it just fascinated me and I loved it. I loved being like scared, but because it was a book, I could just close it and put it aside whenever I wanted to. So I was still in control and in charge. But yeah, I was absolutely obsessed with Edgar Allan Poe growing up. And I think sometimes I have to like scale back my own writing because I realize that I'm writing for young children. But like when I was a young child, I know I was consuming scary content that was maybe above my age level. And so sometimes I forget that your average kiddo may not want as much blood and gore as I do.
Oh yeah, it's so true. It's so true. I mean, every kid is different. Like I was that kid that if it was like Scooby-Doo, for example, like in Scooby-Doo, you get to the end and like every single time the monster is unmasked and it's some like real estate tycoon trying to like, you're like, I was like so angry. Like I could not deal with that because I wanted a real monster. And so for me, like the scary stories to tell in the dark, like so many people go back to that series.
Yes, that one.
Okay, Stephen Gammell's imagery was, of course, the main thing that drew me into it because it is not only like horrifying, haunting, ethereal, but it's like gorgeous, you know, so you get
It's
to
amazing. I love that one.
right? It's like you're drawn in and you kind of start to see like there is another side to what we might think of as something that is like evil and scary. There's like a gorgeous side to it too. So I was
Yeah.
drawn to that. And I mean, like for me as a kid, it's like I wanted to see a real monster because I wanted to have that cathartic moment of when you overcome it. Like, and you feel like you have accomplished something and you've come through, and it seems like you can overcome whatever you're going through in your real life. And for me, for that to happen, for you to have that feeling, you need a real monster. So that's why I liked it, because I was like dealing with really like tough stuff when I was a kid, like many of us. And so I needed those real monsters. Janet, what about you growing up? What kind of spooky stuff influenced you?
So I was more into mystery than true spooky. And so I graduated from Nancy Drew to Agatha Christie, but the spooky stuff that I loved was the Twilight Zone. I was obsessed with the Twilight Zone when I was a kid. I watched it every afternoon. It was on every afternoon after school. Before I'd get into my homework, I would sit down and watch an episode of Twilight Zone. And so it combines that kind of scary, spooky stuff with mystery, with fantasy. And that's exactly what I love. I mean, that's what I love to write now. Anything that has that sort of extra layer of mystery to the spookiness, that's just right up my alley. But the Twilight Zone, oh my God, I would get so creeped out by some of those.
I still go back like once a year and like rewatch all the ones that are online. Like they're so good. Do you guys remember Tales from the Crypt?
Yes.
Yeah, I used to love that one. That
Yes.
was kind of like the version from my childhood of like the Twilight Zone.
Yes.
I
Tales
love
from the
the
Crypt
Twilight
is why
Zone.
I hate swimming in a lake.
Yes. Right.
I don't remember that one, but I'll have to go back.
Oh, there's this horrible one where this like black blob comes out of the water and it's consuming people. And I watched that when I shouldn't have watched it, and now I hate swimming in lakes. I still like 30 years later, and I won't do it.
There's this episode of the Twilight Zone where this guy, I don't remember the exact details, but the guy just wants to be left alone so he can read his books. So somehow, like, he wakes up, and the rest of the world is gone, and all the libraries of the world are open to him, and then he like trips and falls, and his glasses break, and he can't read.
Yeah.
And I was like, that is horrifying.
Yes.
No, that's true horror, right? Oh gosh, Josh, what about you? What are your like big childhood influences?
So when I was a kid, I loved. I didn't read a lot of books, for kids. I was more of the like, what's the next biggest, scariest thing? So I actually started with, and I read this every October. It's Something Wicked This Way Comes, which is about two 13-year-old boys, but it's not written for kids. And this is actually maybe the third or fourth copy of this book that I've owned, because I just tear through it. And I love, it's so creepy and spooky, but it's not a horror story. It's suspenseful, and it kind of does the dark side of human nature sort of thing, which I'm super into. And just the idea that there's, all these different shades of different people. And so there was that. And then on the spooky, creepy side, all of the H.P. Lovecraft stuff I was super into. And I'm really enjoying, I read the Lovecraft Country book, which came out a few years ago, and I'm enjoying the TV show that's based on it as well. So all of that kind of stuff is, I guess it all comes down to like fall, seasonal kind of thing, and like spooky, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and another difference I think is like when I was a kid, I know we did not have such an amazing selection of books that were specifically written for middle graders. Like that has really changed. So we're going to talk a little bit later about some of our favorite like current reads, but let's dive into these top 10 questions. So all of us, we do lots of visits with kids. And so we've compiled kind of the top 10 questions that we get so we can just answer those for you right here off the bat. Number one top question: where do you get your ideas? We get that so much right away. That's the first question. Josh, what about you? Where do you get your ideas for your book?
I wish I knew. Then I could get more of them. No, I mean, it's usually an inkling of an idea, either a character or a snippet of dialogue or something that just sort of lodges itself in my brain, and I start to kind of work on it, and I start to ask questions like, well, for example, with The Witches of Willow Cove, I just found out growing up around here that Salem, Massachusetts is not actually where the Salem witch trials took place. They actually took place in a neighboring town that not a lot of people know that. And so I just started asking questions like, what if I were a kid growing up in a town with a secret history that I didn't know about? Well, what if I was connected to it in some way? And then, from asking those questions, I tend to get answers that suggest more questions. And from that, I kind of build out the skeleton of a book, for example. And then I just kind of run with it and see where it takes me. And each of the books that I've written, those that have been published and those that are sort of still in progress, start with that sort of asking questions based on a really interesting idea that's come to me.
Oh yeah, you got it. And of course, the main question that you kept saying, what if, right? What if? That's a starting point. Adriana, what about you?
For me,
Adriana? Yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
Sound the same.
No, for me growing up, and this is still the case, I live mostly entirely inside my head. And so I was blessed with parents that didn't exactly discourage that. Like daydreaming was fine, which I did all the time. But I can tell now that my son has inherited that blessing from me. Because he, just like you were saying, Kim, he is the king of what ifs for me. He will just come, Mom, what if you could talk to animals? And I'm like, hey, that's a great idea. And we just kind of ran with it. But yeah, like hypothetical questions are our order of the day. We're always asking each other those kinds of things. And I think the biggest thing for me is that I grew up not censoring my ideas, not censoring myself. Like it was okay to have an imagination. It was okay to think these crazy big thoughts and just run with them. Because I think a lot of times when kids are trying to write a story, they start off censoring themselves. And so they get stuck. And so if you just let yourself go, I think that's the biggest thing for me, that I tend not to inhibit myself and just let my mind wander, which can be bad at times, but hey.
Oh, no, I got that. I'm daydreaming like 90% of the day. Janet, what about you?
So just like Josh and Adriana, I get them from everywhere, from my imagination, but I also use visuals a lot. And for example, this image of something that was real, it's called a Death's Head watch. And I found it online as I was sort of trying to brainstorm this story. And I thought, I got to play with that. It's all about time. It's all about death. It's all about skeletons. It's got so many layers in it. Again, I love layering things on top of each other. So ideas just come from everywhere, from things you see, from things you hear, and then from just, picking those little nuggets, as Josh said, out of the air, those little things that just, a word or a phrase or a character that just pops into your head. So, yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the ideas are out there, and I know like everyone watching is super creative and has those ideas. And I think it's like Adriana said, like, just, it's about like not censoring yourself and like realizing, what, these ideas are awesome, and it's your idea. You are the one who can put it like on paper and turn it into a story. So just believe that you can do that, and don't ever be like, oh, this idea isn't very good. Nope, it's great. You just need to follow it through, right? Yeah. So we touched on this a little bit before, but we get a lot of kids asking, why scary stories / like, what's wrong with you? Why are you so creepy? And I get that a lot too. And I've told this story before, like when I was a kid, I would try really, really hard every night to sleep like Wednesday Addams in the old black and white TV show. And in that old show, she slept with her arms crossed like she was in her coffin. And I would try so hard, and every night my arms would fall off, and I would wake up out of that position. I would be so mad. So yes, I'm creepy. I've always loved the aesthetic of that sort of thing. And more than that, I have needed to explore ideas like death that we kind of associate with spookiness. My very first story, my first book length story that I ever found that I wrote, I was like 11 or 12. I still have it. It's an illustrated book about these 5 adults that lose someone they love. They start a club to deal with their grief called the Wednesday Morning Club. And the main character like tragically dies in the final chapter. And it's just this whole thing. But that's because I so desperately needed to find a way to understand this difficult topic of death that writing this fictional story about it was the way that I could do that. And kind of using fantastical elements like, you know, the skeleton that grows up in the backyard, like in my book, Skeleton Tree, were just things that helped me to explore that difficult topic. So for me, that's why I write spooky stories partly, is that I'm trying to find a way to explore things that I feel the need to understand more deeply. And also just the magic of it, like the idea of there being something beyond the everyday, something that we cannot explain. That idea is very intriguing to me. So Josh, why do you write scary stories? What's wrong with you?
Where do I start? Well, you know, actually what you touched upon there at the end, the unexplained, is what fascinates me. And I actually didn't know I was writing a spooky story when I set out to write The Witches of Willow Cove. I thought I was writing sort of a contemporary fantasy adventure, and maybe a little bit of mystery. And then everyone that I gave it to read, they're like, this is really spooky. And I was like, is it? Like, I didn't know that. But for me, it's the element of the unexplained. And I think that kind of really pairs well with spooky, because is there anything that's more unexplained than the paranormal, than these sort of things that go bump in the night, or, you know, just phenomena that we don't understand, but maybe there is an explanation. And I loved that, and I loved exploring that kind of thing. But it's funny, like something else you said earlier about Scooby-Doo. I always loved Scooby-Doo because I loved trying to figure out who it was that was, you know, which real estate tycoon was it? Pursuit. But what I loved the kind of like spooky atmosphere, but it was, you know, a little bit safe, a little bit kind of funny. And I think that aesthetic kind of seeped into my book as well. Like it's a little bit funny. I tend to rely on humor to diffuse spooky situations. But it also has that, like, you know, not just the mystery element, but also that kind of Scooby Gang friendship kind of thing as well is a big important thing to me in my book.
Oh yeah, I love a good ensemble cast. Like, and I loved a lot of things about Scooby-Doo, but I was just like, oh, sometimes you want a real monster, right?
Yes.
Janet, what about you? Why scary?
You know, I don't set out to write scary. I set out to write fantasy, and and the Charmed Children of Rookskill Castle, the antagonist got scarier and scarier as I wrote. And she became more and more really frightening, and yet I was exploring. I mean, I think like what you were saying, Kim. I in all my books, I'm exploring the concept of death and the concepts of time and death and how they merge. And I think we're kind of drawn to writing about the things that worry us the most or frighten us the most, in order to, you know, put some context around it and maybe make it fun instead of scary.
Yeah.
So I think that's I would echo exactly what you were saying. That's why I approach scary stories, that I'm putting them in a place where I can understand them, and hopefully my readers can too.
Yeah. Adriana, what happened to you as a child that made you
big question? No, for me, why scary stories? I have a minuscule attention span, and scary stories tend to be faster paced than maybe some other stories. And I like to write fast paced as well. And so that's one reason. I think too, I love the ability of scary stories to, like you all have been saying, explore deeper themes. I'm not one to pick up a book about death, but I am one to pick up a book about, like you said, the death doula. And that to me sounds fascinating. And I love that book, and it's awesome. But I tend not to pick up books that only deal with big issues. I like when they're juxtaposed with scariness. And I think Josh and I are similar. I absolutely love pairing frightening things with humor. Like that I as well really love, like the ability to diffuse a situation with a snarky remark or a sarcastic remark or something. I have a character in Nestor Lopez where that's pretty much his sole function, is that when they seem like it's, imminent death, he's going to say something stupid. So, but yeah, no, I love the Spooky Stories ability to make those serious themes more accessible to readers and more engaging.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So many reasons to live spooky. So back on our list, the funny thing about some of our visits is that we get the most interesting questions. And one of the questions I always get this question: how much money do you make? And then paired with number 4, are you famous? And we often have to find some interesting ways to answer these questions. So, Janet, are you famous?
No. No, I don't think so. I mean,
How rich
no.
are you? Are you as rich as J.K. Rowling? Like,
Nobody recognizes me when I walk down the street in Manhattan. No. And how much money I make? Not very much.
it's hard to answer, you guys, because what people may not realize is that every contract for every book is so different. Even when it's the same author, like you're going to get paid a different amount for every book. So it's just, there's no one answer. But an interesting thing that kids may not know about how you get paid is that it's not necessarily that you just get paid like one big amount for your book and that's it. You can also have other, like you can sell the audiobook rights to that book and you can get paid for that. You can sell it overseas and have it translated into other languages by a foreign publisher and get paid for that. So there's actually like multiple ways that you can get paid for your book, but the amount totally varies. But Josh, are you famous? I feel like you might be.
I'm super famous. No, I think I'm famous in my hometown right now because I have an 11-year-old daughter who is attempting to make me famous by suggesting my book for her school's book club and telling all of her friends to buy it. So no, I'm definitely not famous, but and the question of money is interesting because I think really as a writer, like you don't go into writing to become famous or to become rich. It's so much work and it's you have to love it because it's a lot of alone time and it's a lot of like toiling and figuring out what your story is and how you're going to write it and then just writing and rewriting and rewriting. And you don't do that if it's for the money. You do that because this is something you love and it's something that you feel like you kind of have to do. Like I always say that writing is the only thing I ever do where I don't feel like I should be doing something else. Like that's when I'm like, okay, which is why I get up at 5 a.m. every day because I have a full-time job. I get up at 5 and I write for 2 hours every morning so that I feel like no matter what else happens the rest of the day, I have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. So not about the money, although I do welcome money. And speaking of, like, if Netflix, if you're listening, my book would make a fantastic Netflix series. So I will also accept Disney Plus, whatever,
Yes, absolutely. So like you said, for many people, it's a passion. Many of us have other jobs. Not everybody, like because when I was a kid, I said I wanted to be a starving artist. I am a starving artist, and I do this full time, and I've been doing it full time for about 2 years. Am I rich? No. Brianna, what about you? Have you felt famous at moments though?
No, and it's amazing family's ability to keep you grounded. Like back in July when I did my virtual book launch, I was sitting and all these people had attended and I was riding high and I came out of the office after that and my son walked in and I said, oh, my book launch was great. I'm so excited. My book's out in the world. And my son was like, that's fantastic. Guess what I did in Fortnite? And then he started, listing his accomplishments. And I was like, yeah, but I wrote a book.
Oh no, I gotcha. I will say the only moments I have felt famous are sort of back in the day when we could do these big in-person author visits, when like I would be speaking to like the whole school, and then afterward the kids would come and line up and be like, can you sign my arm? I couldn't afford a book, but can you sign this piece of paper or my face or something? I'd be like, I probably shouldn't do Sharpie in your face. So those are the moments. I will say, like, the young readers are the only ones who have ever made me like feel famous. But yeah, we are not rich, we are not famous. And so y'all, we have hit the 30-minute mark, but we're gonna keep answering your questions. And so hopefully, you know, y'all can come back to us and like finish the second half. But I know that, you know, some of y'all may have to pop up. So we're broadcasting to everyone on our YouTube channel and answering these questions from all of our young readers. And we are also helping one special school celebrate the birthday of R.L. Stine with this video. So a special shout out to those kiddos who are celebrating R.L. Stine's birthday. But we are going to continue with your questions. So number 5, since we do write spooky books or books with spooky elements in them, we often get asked, have you seen a ghost or had a real paranormal experience? So that is a good one. Adriana, what about you? Do you believe in like sort of real paranormal stuff, or have you had any real experiences?
Yeah, I have. And it's too long a story to tell right now, but I had several experiences when I was a kiddo. And my mom, who was first generation Irish English, had a real affinity for the paranormal. And I think she actually had some sort of, you know, ability to kind of channel things or feel things, sense things. And so I grew up listening to her stories about the people that she saw that she didn't see, or maybe she did. And it wasn't that she was crazy. She just said, I know this wasn't real, but I felt this presence. And so I don't think I have that gift, but I've certainly had experiences. Yes.
Yeah, I will say I'm a huge skeptic, and that's part of the reason I write spooky, is to explore the things I don't necessarily believe in, but I would like to believe in. But when I was a kid, I had a lot of experiences. I had sleep paralysis, which is where you wake up and your body's paralyzed, but you can see. And part of this like medical phenomenon is that you often see and sense like a shadowy figure like looming toward you, and that's like part of the experience. And you can't move, and you're just like struggling to wake up. And I had night terrors when I was a kid too. So I had a lot of experiences with that, and I would sometimes sort of be awake and see figures and be like, this is really weird. I don't think they were ghosts, but it was just all part of that thing when your brain is sort of like, you know, you might be up and walking around, but part of your brain is kind of like still in sleep mode. So yeah, definitely experiences, but still a skeptic. Adriana, what about you?
For me, growing up, I had a lot of experience with perhaps a parent's belief in the supernatural to control a child's actions. Like if you don't clean your room, El Cucuy is going to come and get you. Or if you stay out too late at night, La Llorona is going to snatch you up, you know. So my experience was more of these supernatural entities trying to keep me in line on behalf of my parents. But I never really thought that was true. And yeah, I think I'm like you, Kim, where I'm too much of a skeptic. But I still enjoy the concept, and I always love the origins of like learning the origins of various cultural supernatural entities. And I may or may not use the same tricks with my own child, but
yes, I love that. That is awesome. Josh, what about you? Are you staring your kids in line with various like creatures?
No, but I love this idea. I'm gonna have to look at it. So growing up, living in a spooky funeral home, I desperately wanted there to be ghosts. And we never, you know, my parents used to pretend that we had one. So anytime that like, you know, something went missing or something wasn't where it was supposed to be, it was like, oh, that was Anthea, the ghost who used to live in this old Victorian house long ago. I don't even know if there was a real Anthea. But I desperately, wanted there to be spooky stuff, and even my friends and I started like a ghost hunting club when we were in middle school, and we for a small fee we would go to your home and rid it of ghosts. And we had a 100% success rate. So yeah, so I guess I'm sort of like that character from the X-Files. I want to believe.
Yeah, that is my life motto, is I want to believe, from the X-Files. I can't, that's awesome. We're like the same person right now.
So nothing spooky, but I love the idea of it. So
yeah, same. Well, it's so true, but that's why it's fun to write about it, because in your books, it can be as real as you want it to be. So, okay. So getting back to kind of our writing habits, number 6 is, what is your favorite writing snack? Or do you have some kind of interesting habit that you do every time you sit down to write? Janet, what about you? Do you have some weird snack or some weird ritual that you do?
Coffee.
Yes.
Coffee. And coffee and water. That's it. I have no other ritual than that. I just start writing. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. That's all you need. That's all you need. What about you? Oh, yes.
For me, I drink an obscene amount of Cuban coffee in the morning that usually gets me through my day. But while I'm writing, I really like to snack on these things called mariquitas, which are fried plantain chips. They're super thin, very snackable, only slightly greasy to mess up your keyboard keys, but that's fine. For habits, like I said, since I usually ask students to turn to their teachers and have their teachers cover their ears when I tell them this next part. It's usually horrifying on an educator's from their standpoint. But I have to watch television while I write because I have because I have such a short attention span, I have to be able to look away from my screen just for like 5 seconds to have some different sensory information other than just my writing screen, or my brain wanders too much. I can't write in silence. I've only recently started writing listening to music, and that's actually been a chore. But yeah, I have to watch. I have to have visual stimulation as well. So I watch television. It's usually Netflix, like something I've seen a million times. But that's usually horrifying to educators who want their kids to focus. But that's how I focus.
Oh, yeah. Well, everybody has their own process, and you just have to learn what works for you, right? And there's no right or wrong way to do it. Josh, what about you? Weird snack, weird ritual?
I'm going to have to learn more about Cuban coffee because I like the sound of this. Yeah, so we'll have to talk after. For me, it's also coffee, and I don't even really like the taste of it. I just like having a warm mug that I can take little sips from whenever I need to stop working and think about something. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, my routine is to get up really early in the morning and write. I used to write really late at night, but I have kids now, and that late at night has a different definition for me than it used to. But I have a couple of quirks when I'm writing. I'm a perfectionist, and I'm an editor sort of professionally, and so I'm really, really picky when it comes to what I'm writing. And I have this tendency, this almost sort of paralysis of trying to get my first draft perfect on the first try, which is just not possible. So I trick my brain into not thinking that it counts by changing the font color. So if I'm typing in red in a red font, that doesn't really count. So it can be as bad as it needs to be to get it on the page. It's only when I change it to like regular font color that like it's kind of set. And then I'm like, all right, now I can judge it. But before that, no. And the other thing that I do is I have a very small office that I'm working in, but I actually built in a second desk into the wall behind me so that if writing isn't going well at one desk, I just pick up the laptop and go to the other one and try a different spot. So that it's all about just sort of like getting into the right mood, the right zone, and sometimes it works in one spot and not the other. So
Yeah, totally. I think, yeah, I have a different routine that develops for every book. I would say, but I do have one funny story, which is when I was writing Skeleton Tree, I didn't have a desk or like a desk chair or anything like that. So I wrote that whole book in 2 weeks, sitting on the floor, cross-legged in my dog's dog bed with my laptop like perched up on this little like ottoman thing. And then my dog was actually sitting on this really uncomfortable futon right behind me, just like peering over my shoulder. So she was like my first editor. Yeah, I wrote that whole book in her dog bed. So that's not my usual, like I don't do that anymore, but for that one book, that was how it happened.
Let's talk about this like witchcraft superpower of writing a book in 2 weeks.
Oh, I'm a fast writer. It's a whole thing. Yeah, it's a whole thing. But that said, number 7, and this goes back to like revising, which we've touched on. How many times did you have to read your own book? And so kids ask that because they probably heard like those stories, like they probably had authors come and show them like all the revisions they had to do and stuff. Man, so Adriana, how many times did you have to read your own book?
I feel bad because it was so many times that I actually started to really not like Nestor Lopez. Like I would start to read about him and I'm like, are you kidding me? Get your act together. Like you've got to be joking. So a lot. Yeah. But I think I taught for 16 years before I was an author. And so I was so used to kids writing something once and going, here, miss, I'm done. And so now that I'm an author and I had to read my book so many times, I always like to, when kids begin to complain about having to revise like 1 or 2 times, I want to say, oh dear, let me tell you. If you don't come to hate your characters by the end or your story, then perhaps you have not read it enough.
Exactly. Oh, yes. Josh, what about you? How many times?
Oh my God, 1 million maybe? I have definitely. It's interesting. The first draft of The Witches of Willow Cove was 150,000 words, which obviously would like eat 3 other middle grade books. Yeah, I've had to revise and reread quite a bit. I think overall, I would say there were probably 3 major drafts, and then within that, a lot of revision. And so I've definitely read it quite a bit. And I too came to hate every single one of my characters. And then I put it away. Well, while the book was out with editors, and basically, we were looking for a publisher. I put the book away and I started to write something else. And then when the book sold, I came back to it because I needed to do another round of edits for the publisher. And I was like, oh, all right, I haven't looked at this in 6 months and I don't hate it anymore. Actually, this is not so bad, which is good because they then wanted a sequel. And so I had to find a way to love my characters again.
Yeah,
definitely will read your book a lot, and you will come to. I mean, I can figure out just based on a sentence. I'm like, oh yeah, that's chapter 23. Like I know exactly where.
Oh wow! Well, and so Janet, you and I have had sort of multiple books in this process, and so I know personally it's changed. For my very first book, I probably read that book like 30 times because it just went through so many revisions with my agent and the editor and blah blah blah. And plus, I had read it so many times before I even submitted it. Nowadays, I'm very different because I know that one of my main problems is I will fall out of love with the book, like you have said. And when I fall out of love with a book, my tendency is like, I'll just write it again, like from scratch. Like I love to trash something and just write it again. So my challenge actually now is I am trying to, in those very early stages, actually read it as few times as possible. Like when I send it out, it's going to be polished, but I am trying to do it much less than I did initially, just so that I can stay in love with it once it gets to like the editor and we're going back and forth. So it's changed for me. Janet, what about you?
Every single book has been a different experience. I think with some of them, I've written 30 or 40 drafts, and they're all differently constructed. And I do things like walk while I'm writing, and I spread things out on the floor while I'm writing, and I write in Scrivener, and then I write in Word, and then I handwrite, but but every book is different. The book that I have a book coming out next summer, and that one I wrote in 3 weeks, and it's almost had needed no editing, which is a total surprise for me. So, and that was it just happened. This book, The Artifact Hunters, took me about a year and a half, and it started out with a completely different idea, completely different main character, and it just so it went, tore the whole thing apart and then put it back together in a very different way. So it's been different every single time.
Oh yeah, that's the thing, is every book is different, but it is interesting, I think, for kids to hear, because often there's a rough draft and there's a final draft when you're in school. But that changes if you get into like being an author and doing that whole thing. So number 8, have your writing habits changed during the pandemic? So we talked a little bit about our habits. I will say, like, for me, it's been kind of interesting. When this whole thing first started, I was still like super motivated. And then I got into this period where it was hard for me to write. And I think the reason was that, like, when I'm writing, I have to totally put all of my emotions like into the story, which means I have to be able to like, conjure up those emotions and focus on them and not be distracted by other things that are very like emotionally demanding. And there was so much going on that I didn't feel like I had anything left to kind of pour into the story. Now that kind of like passed. And so I'm kind of back to being like more productive once I got a little bit more used to the situation. But yeah, it did kind of change things for me, just in my ability to focus on this story. Adriana, what about you?
Well, for me, like I said, I used to write watching television, sitting on my couch, but all of a sudden my whole family was home with me, and I couldn't really do that. So I started listening to music while I write, which was a chore because that still is distracting to me. Like my brain doesn't focus. And I know a lot of authors like to make specific playlists for manuscripts so that the mood is the same or it has the same feeling. And I've been writing my Supercuban ghost story listening to K-pop. So I don't think that I follow that same method. I just need noise, basically. But I've found it is challenging to write in this new environment, because I am frequently lovingly interrupted by those I'm with the various requests and updates on video game progress and whatnot. So it's a new method, but I'm making it work.
Yeah, that's tough, man. Janet, what about you? You are kind of up in the woods, right? How's that been? The cabin in the woods.
Yeah, we have a cabin in the woods, and that's where we've been sequestering. I'm not there right now. I'm in a house that we have in town for the winter because it gets a little cold and distant up there. But yeah, I wrote what I'm calling my COVID book. It's not about COVID. But it kind of actually, again, I wrote it really, really fast, and it kind of reflects the mood that we're all experiencing now. And some of the social sort of dynamics that we're experiencing. So we'll see, we'll see. It's being shopped right now. So we'll see what happens with that one. But yeah, and I wrote it really fast because nothing else was happening. So I could really focus on that, and it helped to get me out of, as you were saying, Kim, this dynamic that's going on around us is really distracting. And it really helped me to be able to leave it aside for a while. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Josh, what about you? Do you have a lot of like chaos going on at home, or?
Controlled chaos. I think like you, Kim, at the beginning, I would say probably the month of April, when everything was really like, when we realized that this was not a short-term shutdown kind of thing, this is going to happen for a while. I lost my full-time job because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So I suddenly had a lot more writing time on my hands, and yet could not focus at all. But as things kind of settled down and we got into a new rhythm, I got back to writing with, some regularity, and we sort of figured out the home life situation. The biggest thing that I miss and that has changed is that I used to be able to pick my laptop up on a Wednesday night and go to a cafe and write for a few hours. And same with, like, I used to meet my critique group when we would go out to, you know, this coffee shop or this library or something. And the in-person part of it, or the just being somewhere else and writing part of it, I guess I didn't realize how much of an important part of my process that was. But just like I like to change desks when I'm writing, sometimes changing locations certainly helps and has been a little something to overcome during this.
Yeah, definitely having to adjust in all kinds of ways during this time. But 2 questions left. And so number 9, we often have kids that are listening that maybe are interested in writing their own stories, and they want to know, like, what one tip would we offer for a young person who's interested in writing their own story or maybe their own novel one day. Janet, what about you? What one I put you in the hot seat.
You did. So since I wrote when I was a kid, I wrote a lot. And a lot of it's in a drawer because, I would just say, keep on writing. If you want to be a writer, you have to write. You have to just keep on going. And with everything that you write, you're going to learn something new. You're going to learn how to create a character, how to build a world, how to construct a scene, how to create what we call voice, which is something that you develop when you work really a long time at writing. Because I think, I suspect that all of you watching this have ideas, really great ideas. And how to put them together, that's what we call craft. And craft is learned. That's the good news part, right? Because anybody can learn the craft of writing. And so it's the persistence, it's the keep on going. Also, the other thing I would say is all good writers read a lot. Read things that you might not think that you want to read. Read things that you think are different from what you might want to read, but just read. That's my advice.
All great advice. Adriana, what one tip?
I was going to say read, but
What's your second?
Sorry.
So my second piece of advice. No, I think it's what I kind of alluded to before, is not censoring yourself. Just let the ideas, even if you think, oh my gosh, this is the dumbest idea, nobody's going to want to read this. It doesn't matter. Don't censor yourself, just write, and make sure that you're writing something that you enjoy, that it's a story for you. Because like we've all said also, you have to read your own writing and your own story multiple times. So if it's not a story that you are passionate about, that you connect with, then you're going to get frustrated having to continually work on that story. So I would say just let your imagination flow and make sure that you're writing something that you love.
Yes, love it. And Josh, what about you?
Yeah, actually, I would say something very similar to that, which is something that I learned the hard way, which is to be comfortable with who you are and write the kind of book that you feel comfortable writing. And you do have to kind of come to like yourself a bit in order to accept that this is what I'm writing. And the example I give is my first manuscript, which will never see the light of day, was I was like, I'm going to write like the next Game of Thrones, like epic fantasy, like dark, blah, blah, blah. I wrote the first 200 pages and I gave it to my wife to read, and, she read it, and then she kind of looked at me and she was like, maybe you should write something else. And I was like, ouch. And she's like, you're kind of funny, and, you like adventure, and you like kind of like, sometimes you're goofy and sometimes you like the spooky things. Like, why don't you write something like that? And I was like, I guess I could try that. And it was obvious to me, like 2 paragraphs into the book that I managed to sell as, The Witches of Willow Cove, that this was what I should be writing, and that I shouldn't fight what I wanted to write. I shouldn't try to be something else. It should just be, what are you comfortable with? What's the story you want to tell? And which is why the dedication to my book is to my wife, who told me I should write something like this, because she knew, she understood. And I think when you can understand who you are, what you want to write, what you feel comfortable writing, and like don't be afraid of what people are going to think. Just write it and see. So that's my tip.
Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. Don't be afraid to experiment, because everything you do early on is an experiment and a learning process. And don't be afraid to fail, because if you are failing at something, it means you are out there trying hard and being like a courageous, awesome person who one day is going to accomplish something great, because you are trying new things that are scary and different, So don't be afraid to get out there and experiment, and realize if you are interested in being an author and making that your career, it is possible. When I was a kid, I would look at that name in the book and be like, that is not a real person. That's a mysterious person who lives in a castle, and I could never do that. You can do that. You can write books for your career. And what it takes is like everything that we've said, like sticking with it. The people who make a career of it are not necessarily the people with like this amazing, like inborn talent. They're the people who never give up and just keep writing stories. If you want to do it, you can do it. Just realize like it is possible. And the sooner you start, the better,
Yes.
So that brings us to our final question, and that is, what books are you reading now, or what spooky middle grade books would you recommend? There are so many good ones out there. So I don't have mine to show you. Mine actually came out back in 2015, and it's by Frances Hardinge. It's called Cuckoo Song. So when I first started reading this book, I was amazed with the creepiness. Like, some people could just create such a creepy atmosphere in something that is, when you first look at it, you're like, oh, this is just an ordinary family, 2 sisters. There's nothing really strange here. Yeah, the one sister kind of hates the other sister, and the other sister is always favored by the parents, but there's something just like unspeakably creepy about the situation. And as you dig under layer after layer after layer, you realize it's even creepier than you could have ever imagined. And it's kind of like, if you're finally looking for a unique take on like a creepy doll story, it's not at all what you would have ever expected. It's not like what you have read before. It's just, read this book. It really reminds me, it has kind of vibes of like Coraline by Neil Gaiman, but it brings in so many other elements, and I love it. Cuckoo Song by Frances Hardinge. Josh, what about you? What are you reading now?
Well, 2 different things. So we're listening to an audiobook. Actually, it's by Janet. It's The Charmed Children of Castle. My daughter and I are listening to that right now. But reading-wise, I am currently reading the incredible Lockwood & Co. series by Jonathan Stroud. And so my son, who is 13, is the one who introduced me to these books. I think he's probably read them 6 times. I mean, he's just finishes the series and starts over, and loves them so much. And I was like, well, I need to see what this is about. And I think I'm going to end up being the same way. Just and there goes my Apple Watch. What I love about it is it's sort of like upper middle grade / lower YA. I mean, the kids are, the premise is basically ghosts have started coming out of the woodwork basically all across England, and only kids can detect them. And so the kids have started these sort of ghost hunting agencies. And there's, a big mystery as to why this has happened, and it sort of builds over the course of the series. So great books, really spooky, very, very funny too.
I feel like this book is your life story, like kids who started ghost hunting agency. Like, isn't that?
I am starting to see the parallels now that you mentioned it.
Yeah, so check out those books, Jonathan Stroud, and he has a lot of great books, like the Bartimaeus trilogy is really good by him too. Adriana, what would you recommend, or what are you reading now?
My recent favorites of spooky books that I've read, Lauren Lawrence's The Stitchers. It's the first book in the Fright Watch series, and I'm absolutely ecstatic that this is going to be a series, because it fits, since we're here to celebrate R.L. Stine's birthday. This is very reminiscent of R.L. Stine, of the Twilight Zone, of all of, I feel like, the spooky things we grew up with that we loved. She really nails this, just the aesthetic. And I adored this book, because you're not really sure what's going on, but you're okay with not being sure what's going on. Yeah, I absolutely loved it. And then another one that I read that it's probably one of my favorites that I've read is The Girl and the Ghost by Hannah Alkaf. It takes place in Malaysia, and I love the cultural mythology that's used, and it is super creepy. I love that. I felt like it really actually pushed the boundaries of how creepy you can be in a book. But it's also at the same time one of the perfect examples, like I was saying, of I love horror that also explores deeper themes, and this book does that amazingly well. So I recommend both of those.
Ugh, you're killing me with that because that one is on my to-read list, and you just made me want to read it like 100 times more. So,
It's so good.
you have to read it so fast. Janet, what about you?
So I've been spending the summer reading not spooky books. I've been reading things that are more about the social justice issues. So, but I do have two spooky books on order, and I don't have them with me yet because they're on order. But the first one is this one, Scratch, and by Lindsay Curry, who is also a spooky middle grade author. And it's set in Chicago, and I grew up in Chicago, so I can't wait to read it. And it just came out. And then this one, somebody will recognize, is also on order because it comes out in a few weeks, The Secret Life of Sam by our own Kim Ventrella. And I'm excited about it because when Kim describes this book and about death and a kid dealing with death, that is a topic, as we said at the top of the hour, that really obviously appeals to all of us. So, and Josh, thank you for listening to my book. That's really exciting that you and your daughter are listening. That's fun.
There's so many good books and some nice little shout outs that we got. So that was a fun one. Well, you all stuck with us through our top 10 student questions, and hopefully your top 10 question was in this list. But if it wasn't, I mean, hey, head over to spookymiddlegrade.com, go to our contact form and send us your question, and we'll be happy to answer it. But thanks so much to everyone for joining us, and thanks for helping us celebrate the spooky season. And thanks to all the authors for joining. So we'll see y'all later. Now let's do our little like creepy wave and smile as we sign off. I can never quite tell when it ends, so sometimes I just like to do like a pageant wave and tell